Paul Metz pushed the YF-23 past Mach 1.6 without lighting the afterburners. No reheat, no telltale plume for an infrared missile to chase. Just two Whitney F-119 engines, driving an angular, flat-bellied airframe through the high desert sky over Edwards like it belonged at that speed. October 1990. The biggest fighter competition since the Century series, and Northrop's Black Widow II had just done something its rival couldn't match. The YF-22 supercruised at Mach 1.43. Metz's jet beat it by a wide margin. The YF-23 also carried a smaller radar cross-section. How much smaller remains classified, but Northrop's engineers built the entire airframe around signature reduction in ways Lockheed chose not to. Faster, stealthier. Two of the three metrics the Air Force said mattered most. If this is the kind of story that grabs you, the jet that did everything right and still lost, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest. Drop a comment if you already know how this ends. And if you know a pilot or an engineer, or just someone who appreciates a good underdog, like this and send it their way. The third metric killed it. Agility. Or more precisely, what the Air Force believed agility would mean in the next war. Lockheed's YF-22 demonstrated thrust vectoring, paddle-shaped nozzles that could kick the tail in directions conventional control surfaces couldn't reach. Northrop looked at thrust vectoring and decided the complexity, the weight, the maintenance burden weren't worth it. Their jet relied on its trapezoidal wing and V-tail rudder vaders for maneuvering. Clean design, fewer moving parts. A philosophy that said future air combat would be fought at range with missiles, not in knife fights. On April 23, 1991, Secretary of the Air Force Donald Rice announced the winner, the YF-22. Lockheed got a contract eventually worth more than $66 billion. Northrop got nothing. Two prototype airframes went to museums. The faster jet, the stealthier jet, parked behind velvet ropes in Torrance and Dayton, while the F-22 entered production. The decision is worth a harder look. The Air Force started looking for the F-15's replacement before the F-15 had even proven itself in combat. 1981, Reagan's first year. The Advanced Tactical Fighter program began, not because American fighters had failed, but because intelligence analysts could see what was coming out of Soviet design bureaus, and it worried them. The Sukhoi Su-27 flew for the first time in 1977. The MiG-29 followed in 1983. Both carried infrared search and track systems and could fire beyond visual range. They demonstrated agility that matched or exceeded anything in the American inventory. The Su-27 in particular spooked Western analysts. Its Pugachev Cobra maneuver, first shown publicly years later, hinted at flight control authority American jets simply didn't possess. The ATF requirement crystallized around a single question: what do you build when the enemy has closed the performance gap? The answer had four pillars: stealth, supercruise, advanced avionics, superior agility. Two companies stepped forward with fundamentally different interpretations of those words. Lockheed's Skunk Works partnered with Boeing and General Dynamics. Northrop partnered with McDonnell Douglas. The name Advanced Tactical Fighter, ATF, carried no poetry, no menace. Pentagon procurement labels rarely do. The competing prototypes earned their own designations through the old system: YF-22 and YF-23, sequential numbers that said nothing about capability. Northrop's team called their jet the Black Widow II internally, after the P-61 Night Fighter their company built in World War II, a twin-engine radar-equipped interceptor that hunted Japanese aircraft in absolute darkness over the Pacific. The original Black Widow carried the first airborne radar integrated into an American fighter design. Northrop's engineers saw the YF-23 the same way, a hunter built around its sensors, killing at distance, never seen. The lineage shaped every trade-off they made, and Northrop carried credentials nobody else in the competition could touch. They had built the B-2 Spirit, the most radical stealth aircraft ever conceived, a flying wing bomber with a radar cross-section smaller than a bird's, designed to penetrate Soviet integrated air defenses and deliver nuclear weapons. By 1986, Northrop's engineers had spent years immersed in the deepest classification levels of low observable technology. They understood radar signature reduction, the way a jeweler understands facets. Every surface angle, every edge treatment, every inlet geometry on the YF-23 reflected that experience, so they bet on it, hard. Where Lockheed hedged, adding thrust vectoring, designing weapons bay doors that could open quickly for dogfight missile shots, Northrop committed to the idea that stealth and speed would make close-range maneuvering irrelevant. Their weapons bays sat deeper in the fuselage. The airframe prioritized signature over accessibility. Maintenance crews at Edwards reportedly found the YF-23 harder to service between flights, a detail that barely registered during the fly-off, but landed heavily in the final evaluation. The sound Metz remembered from those test flights, a low, sustained roar without the sharp crack of afterburner ignition, defined the jet's philosophy. Speed without announcement, presence without detection. The Air Force wanted something else. Dick Hardy, Northrop's chief aerodynamicist, angled the YF-23's diamond wing at 40 degrees of leading-edge sweep. That geometry gave the airframe something no conventional fighter wing could deliver: reduced radar return from the front quarter, and efficient sustained cruise above Mach 1.4. The trade-off hit instantaneous turn rate. A diamond wing bleeds energy in hard turns. Hardy and his team accepted that penalty because they believed the jet would never need to turn hard. Lockheed's team made the opposite bet. Bart Osborne, Lockheed's deputy program manager, told Aviation Week in 1991 that the YF-22's design started from the weapons bay outward. The jet needed to transition from beyond visual range missile shots to a close-in gunfight within seconds. That requirement drove everything: the clipped delta wing, the twin vertical stabilizers, the two-dimensional thrust vectoring nozzles that could deflect exhaust 20 degrees up or down. The sacrifices split along predictable lines. Northrop gave up close-in lethality for a front sector radar cross-section that remains classified but reportedly measured in fractions of a square foot. Lockheed gave up top-end supercruise speed and some degree of signature reduction for the ability to point the nose, and therefore the weapons, anywhere the pilot needed in a merge. Two jets built to kill the same Soviet fighters. Two completely different theories about how that killing would happen. The fly-off ran from August 1990 through December 1990. 50 flights for the YF-22, 43 for the YF-23. Northrop flew fewer sorties in the same window, a gap the evaluation board noticed: 7 fewer flights. The evaluation board weighed them heavily. The flight test card for sortie number 37 lists a target altitude of 50,000 feet and a target speed of Mach 1.8. Metz took the second YF-23, the one powered by General Electric YF-120 engines, up through thin October air over the Mojave and hit every mark. The card came back with no discrepancies noted. Look at what that means: 50,000 feet, Mach 1.8. In a fighter-sized airframe with an unaugmented engine, at an altitude where most tactical jets need afterburner just to maintain speed. The YF-23 did it in military power. The air up there is thin enough that sound carries differently. Metz described the cockpit as eerily quiet at supercruise, just the hiss of the environmental control system, and a low vibration through the seat that told him the engines were working. No roar, no buffet. A ghost at 50,000 feet, doing nearly 1,200 miles per hour. The radar cross-section testing happened at the radar cross-section facility at Edwards, and most of what came out of those sessions stays behind classification walls. What filtered into the unclassified evaluation summary: the YF-23 met all low observable requirements. The YF-22 also met them. The summary does not say which airframe produced a smaller signature, but Northrop's engineers had designed every exterior surface: the buried engines, the serrated exhaust troughs, the blended wing-body junction, the canted rudder vaders, specifically to minimize returns from the threat frequencies Soviet ground radars operated on. Multiple sources involved in the evaluation, including retired Air Force acquisition officials who spoke to trade press in the mid-90s, indicated Northrop's jet held a measurable advantage in frontal aspect stealth. The evaluation board's final scoring methodology remains classified. Both prototypes met the ATF threshold requirements for supercruise, stealth, avionics integration, and range. Northrop exceeded the supercruise requirement by the widest margin. Lockheed exceeded the agility requirement by the widest margin. On paper, two jets that both passed the test, one faster and harder to find, the other quicker to turn and easier to maintain. The Air Force didn't pick the jet that scored highest on the metrics it had published. It picked the jet it trusted Lockheed to build in production. That distinction matters more than any flight test card. Paul Metz picked up the phone on April 23, 1991. Secretary of the Air Force Donald Rice had announced the winner 40 minutes earlier. Lockheed, the YF-22. Metz heard it from a colleague, not from the program office. Northrop's team had expected a closer call, not necessarily a win, but a fight that came down to decimal points. The evaluation board's recommendation, according to retired acquisition officials who later discussed the process in broad terms, weighted production risk and life cycle cost alongside raw flight performance. Lockheed had delivered the F-117 on time, under budget, in total secrecy. Northrop's B-2 program had hemorrhaged money, unit costs ballooning from $522 million to over $2 billion per airframe as Congress slashed the buy from 132 jets to 21. That history followed Northrop into every briefing room. The thrust vectoring question mattered too. Lockheed's nozzles gave the YF-22 a post-stall maneuvering capability that Northrop's fixed exhaust troughs could not match. If stealth failed, if the enemy got close, the YF-22 could fight its way out. The YF-23 could only run. Fair points, all of them. The term the evaluation board used, and this comes from the General Accounting Office review published in 1992, described Lockheed's proposal as presenting lower technical risk. The word superior appeared nowhere in the assessment. The distinction sat quietly in a government document that almost nobody read. Northrop's engineers cleared their desks at Edwards within 2 weeks. The two YF-23 airframes went into storage. Nobody issued a destruction order or scheduled a museum ceremony. Tarps and silence in a hangar at Hawthorne, California, while Lockheed began tooling up for a production run that would eventually deliver 187 F-22 Raptors at a unit cost of $361 million each. Torrance, California. The Western Museum of Flight sits in a strip mall adjacent to Zamperini Field. PAV-1, the charcoal gray airframe, the Pratt & Whitney-powered prototype, rests inside on its landing gear, canopy closed, intake covers fitted. Visitors walk past it on the way to a gift shop. Most of them do not know what they are looking at. PAV-2 sits at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, painted in its original spider gray scheme with the red nose stripe Northrop applied for visibility during flight test. The placard calls it a technology demonstrator. The jet that hit Mach 1.8 at 50,000 feet in military power, the airframe that reportedly owned the lowest radar cross-section of any fighter ever tested at Edwards, shares a hangar with decades of aircraft that actually entered service. Northrop proposed a navalized YF-23 variant for the Navy's Advanced Tactical Aircraft program in the early 90s. The Navy passed. Northrop pitched a reconnaissance variant, an unmanned derivative, a regional bomber adaptation. The Air Force passed on each one. By 1994, the company had merged with Grumman, and the YF-23 existed only as two museum pieces and a shelf of classified test data. The F-22 that beat it flew its first combat sortie over Syria in September of 2014, 23 years after selection. 187 airframes. The production line shut down in 2011 when Secretary of Defense Robert Gates concluded the Raptor had no peer adversary to justify continued procurement. Gates said, in prepared testimony to the Senate Armed Services Committee, that the F-22 represented more capability than current threats demanded. 4 years later, China flew the J-20. The Russians followed with the Su-57. Both programs studied the F-22's design philosophy exhaustively: the blended airframe, the internal weapons carriage, the sensor fusion architecture, the supercruise capability. Chinese military aviation journals published detailed analyses of how to detect and engage a supercruising, low-observable fighter at beyond visual range distances. Their entire fifth-generation air defense concept organized itself around defeating exactly the kind of aircraft the F-22 represented. The Air Force now fields 183 operational Raptors and cannot build more. The tooling is gone. Congress explored restarting the line in 2017 and received a cost estimate of $50 billion. The service plans to begin retiring F-22s in the early 2030s, replaced by the next-generation air dominance platform, if that program survives its own budget review. Northrop's YF-23 optimized for the two qualities the 2030s fighter will need most: extreme stealth and efficient supercruise. The Air Force chose the jet built to dogfight. The enemies it was built to dogfight built their entire strategy around making sure the dogfight never happens. PAV-2 faces a wall in Dayton. Its exhaust troughs point toward the hangar door, angled 11 degrees outboard, exactly as Dick Hardy drew them.